Uchasanev, and welcome to the Maā Men podcast show, powered by the Maā Sa Society. In this podcast, we'll touch on the Maā Sa philosophy, consciousness, culture, and the restoration of your spiritual authority in your everyday life. Today's conversation is focused upon the concept of racism and its attack upon confidence in self. You know, we want to let you know that through the attack, through the perpetual fight against racism, in actuality is an attack upon confidence in self. So as a matter of fact, through this perpetual fight against racism, we lose confidence in self, we lose confidence in our ability to govern ourselves, and we lose trust in self. Now, this manifests simply because we see liberation, what comes across as liberation, is really dependence upon the very system we're fighting against. And therefore, that leaves us in a particular situation. So we lose our identity as self-governing beings. We give up our position of authority. And we find ourselves fighting this perpetual fight against racism within a system that is not built to support our specific needs. And when this takes place, what comes across as liberation is in reality an expression of dependence and servitude. You see, when you are fighting and within a system that you think by fighting this system is going to change itself and then support your needs, in actuality, because you misunderstand the concept, you are actually supporting your servitude and dependence. And what ends up happening as a result is we create this false confidence, not in self, but in the very system that is built to bring us into dependence and servitude. And so through this perpetual fight against racism, through this perpetual identifying racism as a source of our problems, through blaming racism for everything, which is what our Generation Z and our millennials have come to create this habit, we are in actuality enslaving ourselves. And so again, you're listening to the Maā Men podcast show, and, you know, powered by the Maā Sa Society. The Maā Sa philosophy is a philosophy of self-agency and self-governance. It is a philosophy that is here to give you back your ability to govern your own life, to bring back your spiritual authority. I want to reiterate that, okay? You see, the concept of Maā Sa, the Maā Sa Society, the Maā Sa philosophy is not a religion, it's a philosophy. See, a religion is asking you to bow down to gods and saviors outside of you. And therefore, as long as you're looking outside of yourself for self-agency, as long as you're looking outside of yourself for self-governance, you'll always be enslaved. You'll always be dependent on the system. As a matter of fact, that system builds dependence and makes you susceptible to racism. As we said last week, racism is simply an expression of dependence. When you are dependent upon entities outside of you, when you are dependent upon ethnicities outside of you, you are always vulnerable to racism. So racism is just a disease that takes place when your spiritual immunity is low, when your self-governance is low, when your self-agency is low. It's just a disease that will come about as a result. That's all it is. So as we look through this process, the Maā Sa philosophy is here to establish within you a new self-identity, a self-identity that's built upon self-agency and self-governance, the ability for you to manipulate things around you to bring your own success into manifestation without relying on other beings, other ethnicities. So we're bringing the Maā Sa philosophy to you, and we're discussing the concept of racism as a way to help us grow beyond racism. Racism is not something that you're supposed to endure perpetually. Racism is something that you're supposed to grow beyond. As a matter of fact, black people have the spiritual power accumulated now to grow beyond racism, to transcend racism. You have accumulated generationally spiritual power that will allow you to transcend racism, will allow you to a point by which the little games that white people are playing will have no effect upon you. That's where we are. But we're never going to tap into that power until we transcend racism, until we develop a new self-identity that puts us in the driver's seat, a new self-identity that gives us self-agency and self-governance, that establishes that as a principle. We're not going to do that. If you're still believing in things outside of you, it's going to bring you into great health. It's going to bring you into great relationships. It's going to raise your kids. It's going to bring you into economical and social prosperity. Then you're going to always be susceptible to racism. But what the Maā Sa is saying that, no, you are the source manifesting through the limitations of the mind itself. And therefore, you are the source. The source doesn't exist outside of you. You are the source. And therefore, you are born in self-agency. So the Maā Sa philosophy is not a religion. It is saying that you are the supreme deity, and we're providing you with the framework to build your pyramid around that deity so you can express your own power in life. That's why you're here listening to me. Now, you may not want to change, which is fundamentally okay. I know change is hard. One of my favorite books was Who Moved My Cheese? You know, change is always hard. And I know I'm in a hard position because I'm asking you to change. But guess what? The world is changing. Society is changing. We have just transitioned into the age of Aquarius. So if you don't change, you're going to fall victim to the fate of a lot of other people here in America. We're transitioning into a new age. And that new age is going to be founded upon the Maā Sa philosophy, founded upon you taking self-agency, founded upon you being self-governance yourself. It's not founded upon you being cared for by other people through the pretense that you're worshiping something outside of you. So I just wanted to say that. But anyway, in order to we are perpetually fighting racism, and we are identifying with racism as the source of our problems. That's problem number one. You can never identify with something outside of yourself as the source of your problems. But when we identify racism as the source of our problems, and therefore we get into this perpetual fight against racism, and then racism is applied to everything that is happening in our lives, we can only do that under the pretense that the system, once it's fixed, once it's retooled, right? Once it's fixed, once it's retooled, as a result of my fighting against it, as a result of my challenging the system, that eventually this system is going to come to a place where it's going to serve me. And what I'm telling you, that is incorrect. The foundational root of the system is built to manifest servitude and dependence within you. The founding fathers of this country all owned slaves. George Washington owned slaves. Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. Abraham Lincoln was racist. Even though he saw the benefit, the economical benefit to the North of freeing the slaves, right? Because the slaves were the source of power for the South. He was racist. He believed in white supremacy and black inferiority, which is multiple quotes out there quoting him on that. So the system is not built to bring you into prosperity and abundance. The system is built to keep you in dependence and servitude from its inception, if you break this system down from its foundational code, if you will, it is built for supremacy. I mean, it's built for racism. It's built to render you subservient and dependent. That is fundamentally the case. So when you're fighting against racism, you're under the pretense that through your fight, Somehow this system is going to say, okay, no, Maā, we'll stop. We're going to change the code. And so that way it can support you now. That is not what's going to happen here. So you're fighting within a system that's never going to redo itself to support you. That's something that you got to understand. It's never going to do that. So your fight in this perpetual system is not going to lead to what you think is going to lead to. The system doesn't favor dependence and servitude. The system supports dependence and servitude. That's what I want you to understand. Now, so through this process, you may think that you're perpetually fighting the system and that you're going to get this system to change, but the reality is it's never going to change because you're supporting the very thing, right, that it wants to do. The fact that you're fighting this system under the guise that something outside of you is going to help you is an expression of servitude and mental enslavement. You're still looking outside of yourself, and that's what keeps you in this perpetual dependence, which is the system serves. That's why the system will support you fighting it. The system will support you fighting it. The system will go ahead and motivate you to be defiant, motivate you to fight the system, motivate you to burn flags and things of that nature and call it, oh, you're expressing your freedom. But in reality, the fact that you are saying that the system is the reason why you're being held back is the very expression of dependence and servitude. So it will assist you in this regard because it supports its agenda. You know, white people, we say that all beings are expression of source, not just black people. We're all expressions of the source. We've all been misled by the system, and we all must grow in self-reliance and self-agency. However, white people, not all white people are racist, but all white people benefited from racism. And let me say that again. Not all white people are racist, but all white people benefited from racism. Now, why is that important to understand? Because through your quote unquote fight against the system, you may have white people that are supporting you, but it's hard for us to look at white people in all honesty because they're benefiting from both sides of the equation. So I'm just saying all this to you, my beloved, is for you to continue to understand what we're really fighting for. See, the word confidence comes from the Latin word confidere, which means to have full faith and trust in. So through your fight against racism, you have full faith and trust that the system eventually will change to support you. What I'm telling you is that that is incorrect, because as long as you are perpetuating yourself, as long as you're presenting yourself in need for the system to change in order for you to benefit, that is by its definition mental enslavement, dependence, and servitude, which it will support. According to the Maā Sa philosophy, the only thing you can have full faith and trust in for your life success is self-agency and self-governance. The only thing you can have full trust in, the only thing that Maā-t built you to have full trust in, is self-agency and self-governance. If you are the source manifesting through the limitations of the mind itself, then your self-agency is an expression of your knowledge and power of self. If self is the source manifesting through the limitations of the mind, then self-agency is an expression of power. That's what I want you to understand as we're going through this conversation today. They say insanity is doing the same thing over and over, looking for different results. We have to make a shift because the United States is in need of the black power, the black essence to rise to the top so that we can save America and carry it forward into this new era we call the Age of Aquarius. I want you to just take a look at this example. Let's go back to our ancestors. Let's look at our ancestors from the slavery days, Jim Crow era, and so on and so on. They went through atrocities, being maimed physically, babies being cut out of stomachs, people limited to where they could go. If they crossed this particular street, they were beat almost to death. If you looked at somebody incorrectly, you went this way. If a white person could actually flat out lie on you and get you killed. That's the type of terror that our ancestors lived in. But our ancestors did better in that environment because they had self-agency and self-governance. So therefore, even though they experienced the harshest expression of racism, as a matter of fact, the racism that we experience today can be seen as very minimum compared to what they went through. But even though they experienced this harshness of racism, they were able to build self-sufficient neighborhoods that were considered the most wealthiest at that time, like Black Wall Street, Bronzeville community in Chicago, and many others. Something that we have yet to even think about doing. Now, this is interesting because currently right now, we have approximately 500,000 people incarcerated, about 500,000 to 600,000 people incarcerated. We have about 1.8, according to Forbes magazine, about 1.8 million Black millionaires in this nation. So that's about 500 to 600,000 incarcerated people. And we got about 1.8 million Black millionaires. Now, if you do the math, and please check me on the math, but if you do the math, that's approximately 3 Black millionaires to every incarcerated person. So that's about 3 millionaires to every incarcerated person in our community. That is progress. Now, mind you, I don't care about the fact that 1.8 Black millionaires is it's the lowest millionaire total, right? There are more white millionaires. I'm not concerned about all that. I'm not concerned about right now about the fact that, that 600,000 people that are incarcerated is almost double the next person, the next ethnicity, which I think is Hispanic community. Yes, that is true. We need to change that. But I'm not trying to divert with our conversation. Our conversation is about progress. Our conversation is about enduring, transcending, and standing in empowerment. That's the conversation that we're having today. So we're having this because you may be fighting against this system of racism, this perpetual fight that you're going through, that is subliminally engulfing you in further dependence and servitude. But you may be fighting this thing thinking that because you've been told that things are so bad in your life, because people are able to throw stats. So you got to keep in mind, and we talked about this last week, that racism has become an industry. See, we got to keep that in mind. Racism is an industry. People are making money off the conversation. People are positioning themselves off the conversation. But you may be fighting this thing of racism, not understanding the true stats. Why don't we talk about the fact that there are 3 Black millionaires per every incarcerated person? Why are we always talking about the 1%ers? Why are we always talking about those things? And why are we tying ourselves to those experiences? For instance, police brutality. Now, I'm not saying that police brutality doesn't exist. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be police reform. There should be police reform. There should be higher accountability. And that's the process that we are going through. And I appreciate that process. However, most Black people have never had negative incidences with Black people, with police officers. However, the small percentage of the few that has becomes the norm of communication. That's why defund the police ultimately did not work, and it hurt the Democratic Party. Why? Because you cannot defund the police if people don't have self-agency and self-governance. If we don't have self-agency and self-governance, then you're going to still have people perpetuating crime, perpetuating violent crime once the police are removed. And that's what happened. And that's why defund the police did not work. Because you're putting forth an idea without considering the reality that we have to have self-governed, self-agent communities in order for you to remove the police force. You can't remove the police force when you got 96% single mother, single parent rate in the black community. We don't have no black fathers here. But anyway, I digress. That's the narrative that you are sold, and you're putting yourself in this perpetual fight because something wants you to stay tethered to that system. Something wants you to stay in a position of dependence and servitude. That's why we're having this conversation. That's why the Maā Sa is being presented to you. This perpetual fight is in reality tethering you to dependence and servitude, whether you know it or not. So we have 1.8 million black millionaires, according to Forbes magazine, which is a well-respected business publication. But we don't talk about the 1.8. We don't talk about the progress that we have come to experience. So our ancestors were able to manifest great success, even though they endured way more extreme atrocities according to racism. They were able to endure and prosper. Why? Because they never gave up their self-agency. They never gave up their self-governance. So you say, well, wait a minute. They were obedient. They had to bow down to. Yes, I call that strategic obedience. See, when you executing a strategy strategically in order to bring success, that is the definition of self-agency. You are looking at the situation, you're looking at the time, and you are expressing a strategy, strategic obedience, to bring yourself into a state of success. That's exactly what I mean. And that is exactly what our ancestors did. That's why they were able to achieve such great things during that time period. Whereas we got 1.8 million millionaires, and it's very hard for you to find a city block anywhere in the nation that is self-sufficient, self-governed, and runs itself. I'm talking about in the black community. Now, you can find these places in the Hispanic community. You can find these places in the Chinese community. You can find these places in the Jewish communities. You can find these places in the white community, but you can't find them in the black community. But we're the ones fighting against racism. We're leading the charge about liberation. We're allowing other entities to tether to us and take advantage of our history. But if you look at your neighborhood, we're not progressing at all. And how is it possible for us not to progress when we have 1.8 million black millionaires? I could tell you why. It's because you don't have self-agency. You don't have self-governance. See, what you're doing right now is I call unintelligent defiance. You're losing your job at work right now because you're unintelligently defiant. You're not doing well in male-female relationships right now because you are unintelligently defiant. You're not doing well in your health because you're unintelligently defiant. You're being told, and I'm talking about Generation Z and millennials, you're being told not to listen to your parents. You're being told to fight against your parents. See, you are putting yourself in a position to further be enslaved by this system. They're teaching you to be unintelligently defiant. What does an unintelligent, defiant person do? They do everything against their own interests. And the other ethnicities can use them for their interests. That is the prototypical expression of slave mindset. So we are being called to rise above this mental slavery through the Maā Sa philosophy to accept your new self-image as having self-agency and self-governance. We have to restructure your self-image to support that. Okay, so I want to go forward here. I'm jumping off my soapbox, and I apologize because I did jump on my soapbox. My apologies. You know, I want to use this podcast as kind of one of those where we can have keep it real conversations, but we're going to also touch into the Maā Sa philosophy. All right. Now, the Maā Sa philosophy, you know, it's many principles. We have, you know, many quote unquote verses and things of that nature that you can learn. That book is coming out here soon, so please stay tuned. But one of the foundational principles of the Maā Sa philosophy is it states that experience can only manifest through seven different ways. And each one of these ways has a ruling principle to help guide us through that experience. And we call those ruling principles, we call them Thesuit. All right. And it's THESU-T, Thesuit. Okay. And so when we use the word Thesuit, there are only 7 Thesuit. Okay. And, you know, like I said, I'm not going to get into any further detail about that. So these statements are read through the first person as source. Now, we say that we are source manifesting through the limitations of the mind itself. Therefore, source cannot exist outside of us. I cannot point to something outside of me and say, source is over here and I'm here. That's impossible. We are the source manifesting through the limitations of the mind. And if you want to talk to source, you need to talk to yourself or talk to somebody around you, because that being is an expression of source as well. So these are what we call, they're spoken as if source is saying this to itself. We call these statements also savior statements, because these statements are here to remind us how to manifest within these 7 expressions of experience to bring about benevolence and prosperity. So we call them savior statements, because once you come through your mother's womb and into this world of glamour, glitter, nice things, feelings, emotions, things of that nature, you can get lost. And so we have these savior statements to ensure that we don't get lost in the mix. So we're being reminded. As the source is reminding itself. All right, so Thesuit 2 goes like this. It says, I am Ra, the omnibenevolent source of all things. It says, Maā-t manifested for my benefit. It says, I am the absolute benevolent light that serves you through your life experiences. Your confidence in me is the assurance that all things, situations, and beings are resolved in favor of your benefit. That is the truth. Now, let's go down here. I want to break each one of those quote unquote verses down so we can get greater meaning about what it is to manifest self-agency. Because if we're not moving towards self-agency, if we're not moving towards self-governance, right, then there's nothing to fight for. See, you can't fight to be a slave. You can't knock your slave owner's house down and say, please enslave me more, which is what you're doing through this unintelligent defiance. You should protect your ability to have self-agency. You should protect your ability to self-govern. You should protect your ability to have your own businesses, to have your own family dynamics, to increase the prosperity of your children, to bring your own health into manifestation. You should fight for that. You should fight to be in sole control of your family, of your community, of your health. That's what you should fight for. You shouldn't fight to be more enslaved. And so, again, my apologies if I'm offending people, but we have to have this conversation. But anyway, let's go to the first verse. It says, I am Ra, the omnibenevolent source of all things. Now, don't get thrown off by Ra. I know you're slave master. I know white people have told you that Ra's the sun god. Ra is not the sun god. The concept of the Holy Spirit was derived from Ra. The concept of Shiva in the Hindu tradition was derived from Ra. Ra is not the sun god. Ra is the vehicle of source manifested in the world. But it says, I am Ra, the omnibenevolent source of all things. It says everything that manifests carries at its root the potential of benevolence and purpose. See, sometimes we have to look at this and understand that you, as the source, brought Maā into manifestation. If source is intelligent, then source would only bring something into manifestation for its benefit. Therefore, it must be serve some type of purpose in my growth and prosperity. That's the truth. It can only manifest that way. Let's go to verse 2. It says, Maā manifested for my benefit. It says, you are not navigating a system designed against you. See, another thing is, once you start questioning why these situations are happening, once you start thinking that the system can be wired against you, once you think the system can be wired against you, that's one of the expressions of very high disrespect. Once you think that the system, that the intelligence of source would manifest a system that doesn't serve its own needs, then that puts you against the fundamental principles of power within that situation. It's impossible for you to reach any level of power thinking that way. It says, we are our own rod and staff. No, not thy rod and staff. We are our own rod and staff because Maā manifested for our benefit. We are the source manifesting through the limitations of the mind. Maā manifested for our benefit. We are our own rod and staff. And our rod and staff is self-agency and self-governance. Let's go to the third verse here. It says, I am the absolute benevolent light that serves you in your life experience. I am the absolute benevolent light that serves you in your life experience. Now, notice what it didn't say. It didn't say you serve it. No, it didn't. See, that's the difference between the Maā Sa philosophy. It's about reestablishing your identity in self. It's about reestablishing your foundation in self-agency and self-governance. It says, I am the absolute benevolent light that serves you in your life experience. It didn't say that you serve it. It didn't say you worship it. It didn't say you bow down to it. It didn't say that. It wouldn't say that because you are the source manifesting through the limitations of the mind. It says, I am the absolute benevolent light that serves you in your life experience. Your life is manifesting for your benefit, for the growth of your experience. That is the truth. So we do not fight in acknowledgement of servitude. Why would you fight in a system to acknowledge servitude? If you are acknowledging servitude, then you are not functioning as the source manifesting through the limitations of the mind. So we have to stand and fight for self-governance and self-agency. Verse 4, in the last verse, it says, your confidence in me is the assurance that all things, situations, and beings are resolved in favor of your benefit. That is the truth. And we getting back to that word confidence, which comes from confidere, which means what? Complete trust and faith in something. And the only thing you can have complete trust and faith in is what? Self. Why we say that? Because self is the source manifesting through the limitations of the mind itself. That means you manifested the universe. You manifested Maā-t. And therefore, being an intelligent being, you wouldn't manifest Maā-t to be wired against your interests. You would manifest Maā-t for your favor, for your development, for your benefit. Now, as we're going through hardships in life, whether that could be through racism or just simple life challenges, we're being asked to endure, overcome, and stand in empowerment. So we're not going to be able to get access to our empowerment unless we endure and overcome. So yes, hardships may be brought to us for us to endure and overcome and stand in empowerment. Why? Because your confidence in me, when it says your confidence in me, what is it saying? Your confidence in self-agency. Your confidence in me is the assurance that all things, situations, and beings are resolved for your benefit. That is the truth. You brought this world into manifestation for your benefit. And through standing in self-agency, you're able to bring that benefit to the forefront. All situations that we go through have meaning and purpose. We call that concept Maā-t. We say that everything is an expression of the supreme intelligence. That means everything has meaning and purpose. That means you're listening to me right now. There's meaning and purpose. Me speaking to you right now, that's meaning and purpose. Everything has meaning and purpose. That's why when we said earlier about Black people being able to stand in empowerment, it's because they had self-agency. What we need to do is make sure that you create and bring back your self-agency so you can prosper in this new world. That's what we mean by the Maā Sa philosophy and supporting you re-engineering your self-identity, to stand in self-governance, to stand in self-agency. And that is something that you should protect, that you should fight for.